Omar enjoyed quiet mornings in his small front yard. He liked watering the flowers and watching the sunlight slowly touch the roofs of the houses around him. Life in the neighborhood was usually calm, but one thing always disturbed that peace: the constant watch of their neighbor, Karen. Karen lived 2 houses away, yet somehow she noticed every little thing that happened in Omar and Amina's home. If their car was parked slightly close to the sidewalk, Karen noticed. If the trash bin stayed outside for an extra hour, Karen noticed. She always noticed, and she always complained. Amina, Omar's wife, tried not to let it bother her. She worked from home, kept the house tidy, and looked after their small garden. Let her talk, she often said to Omar with a small smile. She cannot control the whole world. But Omar could see how the neighbor's behavior made Amina tired. She hid it well, but he knew. One Friday morning, when Omar opened the front door to fetch the newspaper, he found a white envelope taped to the door. It had the letters HOA printed in bold red at the top. His heart sank. Another one, he muttered. Amina came to the door, her scarf loosely wrapped as she carried a cup of tea. "What is it?" she asked softly. Omar opened the envelope and read the paper aloud. It was a fine notice from the Homeowners Association. The reason: trash bin left in plain view for more than 3 hours after collection. The fine amount was written at the bottom, not very large, but enough to make Omar's face tighten. Amina shook her head. "This is nonsense. The truck came late that day. I brought the bin in as soon as I could. They cannot expect us to stand outside and wait every minute." From across the street, Karen's curtains moved. Omar noticed the shadow behind them. She was watching, just like always. "I know who reported this," Omar said quietly. Amina sighed. "We should not pay. It is unfair." Omar looked at her. "If we ignore it, they may trouble us more." Her eyes were calm but firm. "If we keep paying, she will never stop. She enjoys this power." Omar wanted to argue, but he saw the strength in Amina's face. She had always been steady, always stood with dignity even when others tried to push her down. He nodded slowly. "All right. We won't pay this time." The decision felt heavy, yet Amina stood straighter after saying it. For once, they would not bow to Karen's endless complaints. That evening, as the sun went down, Omar noticed Karen walking her dog. She stopped in front of their house for longer than necessary, staring at the yard as if searching for another mistake. Omar pretended not to see, but his hands tightened around the watering can. The next few days passed with an uneasy silence. Karen did not speak to them, but she watched. Omar felt her eyes even when he stepped out to check the mail. Amina stayed busy with her work, though sometimes she paused by the window, her lips pressed together. On Tuesday morning, another envelope appeared on their door. This time it said, "Unapproved garden decoration, solar light placement not according to guidelines." Another fine. Omar felt his chest burn with frustration. He wanted to march to Karen's door and demand an explanation, but Amina stopped him with a gentle hand. "Leave it," she said. "This is not about rules. This is about her trying to control us." "But it is wrong," Omar insisted. "Yes," Amina agreed. "But if we argue every time, she wins. I will not give her that joy." So once again, they ignored the fine. Karen's patience, however, was thin. She began sending pictures of their yard to the HOA board, claiming constant violations. Then, one evening, as Omar was trimming the hedge, Karen walked by and spoke for the first time in weeks. "You know," she said with a smirk, "ignoring fines is against community policy. The board will not be kind if you keep this up." Omar wanted to answer, but Amina stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "We are not breaking rules, Karen. You are simply watching too closely." Karen's eyes narrowed. Rules are rules. You'll learn soon enough. She tugged the dog's leash and walked away, leaving a trail of tension behind her. That night, Amina sat quietly in the living room, her hands folded in her lap. Omar sat beside her. "Do you think she will actually push this further?" he asked. Amina gave a small, tired smile. "People like her cannot stop. She will not rest until she feels she has won. But we must stand firm." Her words carried a quiet strength, but Omar felt a storm building. Something told him this was only the beginning. And he was right. The very next week, a loud knock shook their front door. Omar opened it and found a police officer standing there, Karen waiting proudly on the sidewalk. Amina rose slowly from the sofa, her face calm but her heart heavy. This was no longer just about fines. It was about to become something far bigger. The sound of knocking still echoed in Omar's ears as he stood at the door. A tall police officer stood on the porch, his uniform neat, his expression polite but serious. Behind him, Karen crossed her arms and watched with a satisfied smile, as though she had finally won a long game. "Good evening," the officer said. "I received a call regarding some complaints in this neighborhood." Omar swallowed his frustration and tried to remain calm. "Please, come in," he replied. The officer stepped inside, his boots quiet on the wooden floor. Amina joined them, her scarf neatly pinned, her face calm but steady. Omar admired her strength. Even now, with Karen's eyes watching from outside, Amina did not waver. Karen stayed on the sidewalk, whispering something into her phone. Omar knew she was calling another board member, perhaps preparing more pressure. The officer cleared his throat. "I was told there have been repeated violations of HOA rules, and that the homeowners here have refused to cooperate. I wanted to hear your side." Amina gestured toward the couch. "Please sit. We will explain." The officer nodded and sat down, while Omar remained standing near the doorway, his arms crossed. He could feel the unfairness pressing on his chest. Amina brought the fine notices from a drawer and placed them gently on the coffee table. "These are the letters we received. As you can see, the reasons are very small things: have been outside for a short time, a solar light in the garden. We believe these complaints are not honest." The officer picked up the first paper and read silently. His brow furrowed. He looked at the second, then the third. His eyes moved from the papers to Amina's calm face. "And you did not pay?" he asked. Amina shook her head. "We did not. We cannot keep paying for things that are not real violations. This is not about rules. This is about one person using the rules to harass us." The officer leaned back slightly. His face softened, as though something familiar stirred in his memory. From outside, Karen called out, "Don't let them fool you. They think they're above everyone. Make sure you fine them properly." Her voice was loud enough for the whole street to hear. Neighbors peeked from windows, curious about the scene. The officer raised his hand politely, signaling for silence. Then he turned back to Amina. "Mrs." He paused, searching for her name. "Amina," she said gently. The officer studied her face, his eyes suddenly wide. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. Finally, in a quiet voice, he said, "Judge. It's you." Omar froze. His heart skipped. He turned sharply to look at the officer, then at his wife. Amina's eyes lowered for a moment, then she gave a small nod. "You remember," she said softly. The room grew still. Omar looked between them, confused. "What is going on?" The officer's voice was filled with surprise and respect. "Years ago, in the county courthouse. You were the judge. I'll never forget your face. I stood before you, a foolish young man. I made mistakes, and you gave me a chance when others wanted to punish me harder. You told me that if I wanted respect, I had to live with honesty. That day changed my life. You gave me a second chance. Karen, hearing part of this through the open door, frowned and stepped closer. What are you talking about? She's no judge. She's just a woman who refuses to follow rules. But the officer ignored her. His eyes stayed on Amina, filled with gratitude. Omar sat down slowly, still processing. He had always known Amina carried strength and wisdom, but she rarely spoke of her past. He never knew she had once sat on a bench of law, deciding the futures of others. She had chosen a quiet life with him, leaving that chapter behind. Amina lifted her eyes. They were calm, but a hint of emotion shone in them. I left that work long ago. I wanted peace, a life away from constant battles. But it seems trouble finds us still. The officer leaned forward. I would not be who I am today without you. You may have left the bench, but your words stayed with me. And now I stand here as an officer, trying to serve with fairness. I owe you for the path I walked today. Karen stomped up the porch, her face red. Enough of this. You're here to do your job, not to play old memories. Find them. Or arrest them. They are breaking the rules. Her shrill voice cut through the quiet moment. Omar clenched his fists but held back his words. The officer stood up calmly, turning to face Karen. His tall frame made her pause for a second. Ma'am, he said firmly, this is not a police matter. HOA disputes are civil, not criminal. I am here because you called, but I will not be used to settle personal grudges. Karen's jaw dropped. Personal grudges? Do you know who you are speaking to? Yes, the officer replied evenly. A neighbor who is misusing authority to trouble others. And that stops now. Omar felt a wave of relief wash over him. Amina remained composed, but he noticed her hand trembling slightly against her lap. The officer gave a respectful nod to Amina before heading toward the door. I will file my report. And I will also note that these complaints appear to be made in bad faith. Karen's face twisted in shock. For once, she had no clever words. As the officer stepped outside, Omar looked at Amina. Judge, he whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief. Amina gave him a small, tired smile. That was a long time ago. I hope to leave it behind. But perhaps, tonight, the past returned for a reason. Omar took her hand gently. He realized there was much more to his wife's story than he ever knew. And now, it seemed, Karen's endless complaints had opened a door to truths hidden in silence. The house grew silent after the officer's words, yet the tension in the air stayed thick. Omar sat still, trying to absorb what had just happened. His wife, the woman he knew as calm, gentle, and private, had once been a judge, a figure of authority who shaped lives. The thought both amazed and humbled him. Outside, Karen was pacing in the yard, her phone pressed to her ear. She spoke loudly, making sure everyone on the street could hear. The officer refuses to do his job. Can you believe it? He's taking their side. I'll call the board, the city, whoever listens. Her voice carried through the evening air, pulling curious neighbors to their porches. Some leaned against fences, others peeked from behind curtains. They had all seen Karen complain before, but this time felt different. Inside the living room, the officer turned back to Amina. His expression was serious but respectful. Ma'am, I know you wish to leave the past behind. I will not speak of it if that is your wish. But I must be honest, seeing you again reminded me that fairness is not only a duty, it is a choice. And right now, you are being treated unfairly. Amina nodded slowly, her eyes calm. Thank you, officer. We only want to live in peace. We follow the rules, but Karen finds reasons to twist them. Omar added quickly, his voice tense, this has gone on too long. Every week, a new notice. We cannot breathe without her watching us. Now she calls the police? This is not a life. The officer listened carefully, then lowered his voice. I cannot stop the HOA from sending notices, but I can make sure my report reflects the truth. You are not criminals. These are neighbor disputes, not police matters. From outside, Karen shouted again. I know my rights. If you won't handle this, I'll make sure the board handles it my way. The officer gave Omar and Amina a small nod of reassurance before stepping outside. Omar followed him to the porch. The officer raised his voice firmly, addressing Karen. Ma'am, I have explained this is not a police issue. This couple has not committed any crime. Please do not misuse emergency services for personal conflicts. Karen's mouth opened and closed in shock. Misuse? I'm protecting the community. They think they are above the rules. Neighbors were gathering now, some whispering, some shaking their heads. For years, many of them had silently suffered Karen's strict eyes and endless reports, but few dared to speak out. Tonight, however, they could not ignore the scene unfolding before them. An older man from across the street stepped forward. Karen, maybe you should let it go. Not every small thing needs a complaint. Karen spun around. So you're against me too? I'm the only one keeping this neighborhood proper. The officer remained calm but firm. Ma'am, this ends tonight. I will note in my report that you have repeatedly made unnecessary calls. If this continues, there may be consequences. For a moment, Karen's face turned red, then pale. She huffed, pulled her dog's leash, and marched back toward her house. But even as she left, she muttered, this isn't over. I'll show them. I'll show all of them. The crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors whispering to one another. Some gave Omar and Amina small nods of support before heading back inside. Omar returned to the living room, where Amina sat quietly. Her hands rested in her lap, her posture calm, but he saw the weight in her eyes. He sat beside her. You didn't tell me, he said gently. Amina gave him a small, tired smile. I left that life behind. When I stepped away from the bench, I wanted to be only Amina, your wife, your partner. Not a judge, not someone people fear. Omar reached for her hand. And yet, even now, you carry the same strength. I saw it when you faced Karen. You didn't shout, you didn't bend. You stood tall. Amina squeezed his hand softly. Strength is not in raising the voice, Omar. It is in holding your ground with dignity. The officer stepped back inside briefly, his cap in his hands. I will leave now, he said. But please know, you are not alone. Others see what is happening. Sometimes it only takes one person to speak before others find their voice. Amina nodded gratefully. Thank you. With that, the officer left. The sound of his car driving away faded into the night, leaving behind a strange mix of quiet and unrest. For a moment, husband and wife sat in silence. Then Omar whispered, do you think she will stop? Amina looked toward the window, where Karen's curtains were once again drawn tightly. Her voice was soft but steady. No. People like her rarely stop. When power is their comfort, they fight to keep it. This was only the beginning. Omar sighed heavily, but deep inside, he knew Amina was right. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Omar caught Amina standing by the window, gazing out into the quiet street. Her face carried no fear, only calm determination. He walked over and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Whatever comes, we face it together, he said. She leaned against him gently. Yes, she whispered. Together. But in the shadows of the neighborhood, Karen's mind was already busy. Her pride was wounded, and her anger burned hotter than ever. She had been embarrassed in front of everyone, and she was not the type to let such things pass. Something told Omar and Amina that the real storm was yet to come. The next morning arrived with golden sunlight stretching across the neighborhood. Birds chirped, children hurried to school, and the air smelled of fresh grass. But inside Omar and Amina's home, the mood was far from peaceful. Omar sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, his mind replaying last night's events. The image of the officer calling his wife judge kept echoing in his head. He had been married to Amina for years, yet she had never once spoken about this part of her life. Amina walked in, her scarf neatly draped, carrying a small plate of bread. She placed it on the table and sat opposite him. Her face was calm, but Omar could sense her silence carried heavy thoughts. Finally, he asked softly, "Why didn't you tell me about being a judge?" Amina's eyes lowered. She tore a piece of bread slowly before answering. "Because I wanted to leave it behind, Omar. That life was filled with decisions, arguments, and endless conflict. Every day, I faced people's anger, their sorrow, their mistakes. When I married you, I wanted a new life. A life where I was not a title, but simply Amina." Omar listened quietly. Her words made sense, but still, he felt a mixture of awe and sadness. "But it is part of who you are," he said gently. "And now, it has returned. Last night proved it." Amina smiled faintly. "Sometimes the past finds us when we least expect it." Just then, a knock at the door broke their quiet moment. Omar opened it to find the same police officer standing there. His expression was kind, though a little serious. "Good morning," he greeted. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to check in." Omar invited him inside. Amina offered him tea, which he accepted politely. The officer spoke after a pause. "I know you did not want attention last night, but word is already spreading. Some neighbors are talking. They know now that you were once a judge." Amina remained calm. "Let them talk. It does not change who I am today." The officer nodded respectfully. "Still, I think you should know Karen is not finished. I saw her calling members of the HOA board after I left. She is pushing for a formal meeting about you." Omar frowned. "So she will drag this further?" The officer leaned forward slightly. "She wants to use the board to corner you. But don't worry. You are not alone. Many neighbors saw her behavior last night. Some even told me privately that they are tired of her complaints." For the first time in days, Omar felt a spark of hope. Perhaps others would finally see the truth. After the officer left, Omar turned to Amina. "This may not be easy. She won't stop until she feels powerful again." Amina folded her hands gently on the table. "Then we will face her, Omar. But we will do it with patience. Anger feeds people like her. Calmness defeats them." That afternoon, as Omar trimmed the hedge outside, two neighbors approached an elderly couple named Mr. and Mrs. Latif. They smiled kindly. "We saw what happened last night," Mr. Latif said. "You have our support. Karen has troubled us too, but we never spoke up. Maybe now is the time." Their words warmed Omar's heart. For so long, he and Amina had felt alone against Karen. But now, slowly, the tide seemed to shift. Inside the house, Amina sat by the window, writing in a small notebook. She was making notes of each fine, each complaint, each unfair action. She wanted to be prepared if the HOA board demanded explanations. Her calm focus reminded Omar once again that though she left the courtroom years ago, the wisdom of a judge still lived within her. That evening, Karen appeared again on the street, speaking loudly to another board member who had come to visit her. Her gestures were sharp, her voice filled with complaint. Omar and Amina did not step outside, but they could hear her saying things like, "They think they are special. She acts like she's above everyone." Omar clenched his jaw, but Amina touched his arm gently. "Let her speak, she whispered. Her words are building her own trap. Night settled, and the couple prepared for bed. But as Omar closed the curtains, he noticed Karen still pacing in her yard under the porch light, talking on her phone. Her determination was clear. She would not let this go easily. Lying in bed, Omar whispered, "Are you worried?" Amina turned to face him. Her expression was calm, her voice steady. "I am not worried, Omar. I have faced louder voices than hers, stronger arguments than hers. Truth does not fear noise. When the time comes, we will stand, and others will see." Omar nodded slowly, holding her hand. In that moment, he realized something important. Karen might have started this battle, but Amina's quiet strength would decide how it ended. Outside, the street was calm. But under that calm, the storm was gathering. The HOA board meeting was coming soon, and with it, a chance for the truth to shine. The days that followed were strangely quiet, but Omar and Amina both knew it was the silence before a storm. Karen no longer came near their yard, yet her presence was felt everywhere. They often saw her walking quickly from house to house, speaking in hushed but angry tones to board members. At night, her windows glowed late into the evening as she typed furiously on her computer. One afternoon, as Omar returned from the store, he found a folded note pinned to their mailbox. It was written in bold letters, "HOA board meeting scheduled, attendance required." The date was circled in red ink. Omar didn't need to guess who had pushed for this meeting. Inside, he handed the note to Amina. She read it slowly, then placed it on the table with calm hands. "So, it begins," she said softly. Omar frowned. "She wants to humiliate us in front of everyone." Amina's voice was steady. "If that is her plan, let her try. Truth is stronger than pride." Before Omar could reply, a knock came at the door. It was the officer again, standing with a polite smile. "I heard about the meeting," he said. "I thought I should come by." Omar invited him in, and soon the three of them sat around the table. The officer looked serious. "Karen has spoken to the board. She is trying to convince them that you are repeatedly breaking rules and disrespecting the community. But I know the truth. And I want you to know, if you attend that meeting, you will not be standing alone." Amina gave him a grateful nod. "Thank you. Your presence will matter." The officer leaned forward. "She is loud, but noise is not strength. When the board sees how she treats you, and when they hear others share their experiences, her power will weaken." Omar listened, his chest tight with both worry and hope. But what if no one speaks? What if everyone stays silent? The officer gave a small smile. "People are braver than they appear. Sometimes they just need one voice to open the way. I believe your wife has that voice." Amina lowered her eyes modestly, but Omar could see the quiet strength in her. She had guided him through every storm in their marriage with patience and wisdom. Now, it seemed, her calmness was the very shield they needed. On the evening before the meeting, Karen could be heard from her porch speaking loudly to anyone who would listen. "Tomorrow, justice will be done. The board will finally take action. These people think they are untouchable. Well, no one is above the rules." Her words carried across the street, but Omar and Amina remained inside, quietly preparing. Amina gathered all the notices, organized them neatly, and placed them in a folder. Omar watched her work with admiration. She did not rush, she did not complain. She was preparing as though this was another day in court, even though it was just a neighborhood board meeting. Before going to bed, Omar whispered, "Are you ready for this?" Amina smiled gently. "I have been ready all my life. The only difference now is that I am not wearing a robe. But my voice is the same." The next evening, the community hall was filled with neighbors. Folding chairs lined the room, and a long table stood at the front where the HOA board members sat. Karen was already there, standing tall with a stack of papers in her hands. Her eyes burned with determination. When Omar and Amina entered, whispers spread across the room. Some neighbors nodded at them kindly, others looked curious. The officer sat quietly near the back, his presence calm but firm. The meeting began. One of the board members cleared his throat. "We are here to discuss repeated violations and complaints regarding the household of Omar and Amina." Karen wasted no time. She marched forward, slamming her papers on the table. "The evidence is clear," she declared. "Trash left out, unapproved decorations, disrespect for rules. I have reported every detail, and they continue to ignore the fines. If we allow this, what kind of neighborhood are we?" Her voice rang across the hall, sharp and filled with pride. Omar's fists tightened in his lap, but Amina placed her hand over his, calming him. She rose slowly and stepped forward. The room grew quiet. She placed her folder on the table and spoke in her steady voice. "We are not against rules. We respect them. But rules must be applied with fairness, not with anger. Each fine we received was not about keeping the neighborhood better. It was about one person's desire to control. Look at the dates, the reasons, all exaggerated, all targeted." She opened the folder and spread the notices across the table. Neighbors leaned forward to look. Some frowned, others nodded. Karen tried to interrupt. "Don't believe her sweet words." But the officer stood up at the back. His voice was calm yet firm. "I was called to their home. I saw firsthand what was happening. These are not criminals. They are good people who want peace. It is not the police's job to handle personal grudges." His words carried weight, and the room grew still again. One neighbor, Mrs. Latif, stood and spoke. "She is right. Karen has bothered us too. She once fined me for having my curtain the wrong color. We were too afraid to say anything." Another neighbor added, "She fined my grandson for riding his bicycle on the sidewalk. She always finds something." The room began to murmur. More voices rose, sharing stories. Slowly, the board members' expressions shifted from stern to thoughtful. Karen's face turned red. "This is nonsense. You're all ungrateful. I keep this place proper, and this is how you repay me." But no one clapped or agreed with her. The tide was changing. Amina stood tall, her voice calm but strong. "This is not about me or Omar. This is about fairness. A community cannot grow if fear rules it. We need respect, not constant punishment." The board members exchanged looks. For the first time, Karen seemed unsure. Omar looked at his wife, his heart swelling with pride. She had faced Karen without anger, without shouting, yet her words carried more power than all of Karen's complaints combined. The meeting was not finished yet, but already Omar could sense the outcome leaning in their favor. The hall was tense, filled with whispers as Amina's words settled over the neighbors. For the first time, many realized that the endless fines and warnings were not about rules at all but about Karen's need for control. The board members shifted in their chairs, glancing at each other with uncertain expressions. Karen, however, refused to give up. She clutched her stack of papers tightly and raised her voice. "You cannot listen to these lies. I have proof. Look at the dates, the times. They broke the rules. And if you let them go unpunished, the entire neighborhood will collapse into chaos." Her words echoed sharply, but they no longer carried the same weight. The neighbors had heard too much, and their faces showed doubt. Amina remained calm. She didn't shout or wave her hands. Instead, she stood quietly, her presence steady. "No one is asking to ignore rules," she said gently. "But rules should serve the community, not become a weapon against it. Fairness means looking at intention, not just small mistakes. A trash bin left out for a few hours is not disrespect. A garden light is not harm. Her words were soft but clear, and people leaned forward to listen. At the back, the officer nodded slightly, his arms folded. He remembered the day years ago when this woman had shown him mercy in court. Now he saw her standing again with the same dignity, though in a different place. A neighbor raised his hand timidly. "I want to say something." The board allowed him to speak. It was Mr. Latif. His voice trembled at first but grew stronger. "Karen once sent me 3 warnings because my mailbox paint was a little faded. I am old, and I could not repaint it quickly. She threatened to fine me every week until I did. That is not kindness. That is cruelty." The room grew quiet. Mrs. Latif added, "She fined us when our grandson's ball rolled into the street. A child's play is not a violation." Another neighbor stood. "She sent me a notice for leaving my window open too wide. She said it looked untidy." I stayed silent, but I was hurt. One by one, neighbors began to speak. Stories poured out, small, almost silly things that had been turned into serious violations. It was like a dam breaking. Once the first voice spoke, the others found courage. Karen's face turned pale. She shook her head in disbelief. "This is betrayal. All of you benefited from my hard work. I kept this neighborhood clean and proper, and now you stand against me." But the board members were listening carefully. Their pens scratched across papers as they took notes. They exchanged quiet whispers among themselves, their expressions stern. Finally, the head of the board raised a hand. "Enough shouting. We have heard both sides. It is clear that many residents feel unfairly treated. This is serious." Karen gasped. "Serious? The only serious thing here is their refusal to pay fines." The head of the board looked directly at her. "No, Karen. The serious matter is the trust of the community. If residents believe rules are being used unfairly, then the purpose of the HOA is lost." The officer spoke then, his voice calm but firm. "I was called to their home as if a crime had been committed. What I found was not a crime. It was harassment. I said it then, and I will say it here. This is a civil matter, but the way it has been handled damages the peace of the neighborhood." His words carried authority, and even Karen could not easily argue. Omar sat quietly, watching it all unfold. His heart swelled with pride as he looked at Amina. She hadn't raised her voice once, yet she had turned the room. Her calm dignity had given others courage. Karen, desperate, tried one last time. "You cannot trust them. She hides behind her calm face, but she thinks she's better than us all. You don't know who she really is." Her eyes darted toward Amina, but Amina remained composed. She looked directly at Karen and said softly, "Who I am does not matter. What matters is how we treat each other today. Respect should not be given out of fear, but out of kindness." The room fell silent. Even those who did not know Amina well felt the power in her quiet words. The board members excused themselves for a short discussion. The neighbors waited, whispering among themselves. Karen sat stiffly, her lips pressed tight, her fingers tapping nervously on the stack of papers she had once held with pride. After a few minutes, the board returned. The head cleared his throat. "We have considered everything. The fines against Omar and Amina will be dismissed. Furthermore, we will be reviewing the pattern of complaints that have come from a single source. This behavior cannot continue. Our goal is community harmony, not fear." Gasps filled the room. Some neighbors clapped softly, others sighed with relief. Omar felt his shoulders loosen for the first time in weeks. Karen stood abruptly, her face red with anger. "You fools! You are making a mistake. Without me, this place will fall apart." But this time, no one supported her. She looked around, expecting agreement, but saw only cold stares and quiet disapproval. Amina turned to Omar and whispered, "It is ending." He squeezed her hand gently. Because of you. Karen stormed out of the hall, her heels striking the floor sharply. The door slammed behind her, leaving the room lighter, freer. For the first time, Omar and Amina felt the community stand with them, not against them. The storm had begun to clear, but they knew one last wave of tension was still to come. The morning after the board meeting, the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter, as if a heavy curtain had finally lifted. People walked their dogs with more ease, children played on the sidewalks without fear of a sudden complaint, and smiles were exchanged more freely. Omar stood at the front porch, sipping his tea. He looked at the street where once he had felt watched, judged, and cornered. Today, the same street looked peaceful. The same houses stood there, but the silence felt friendly, not tense. Amina joined him, her scarf resting neatly on her shoulders. She placed her own cup beside his and whispered, "Do you feel it too?" "Yes," Omar said with a small smile. "The whole place is breathing again." Amina nodded. Her heart was calm, but she also knew that peace did not come overnight. Trust had to be rebuilt, and wounds had to heal. Still, she believed this was the first step. Just then, the officer who had stood by them the day before walked up their path. He wore his uniform, but his face carried warmth instead of official distance. Omar greeted him with a firm handshake. "Officer, it's good to see you," Omar said. The officer smiled. "I wanted to stop by. I couldn't leave yesterday without saying thank you. Judge Amina, you may not wear the robe here, but your fairness shines just the same. You reminded everyone what true justice looks like." Amina lowered her eyes humbly. "I only spoke the truth. People need kindness more than punishment." He nodded. "And you gave them courage. You gave me courage too. Yesterday, when I saw you standing in that hall, I remembered the day in court when you looked past my mistakes and saw my effort. That memory helped me do the right thing." Omar looked at his wife with pride. "She has that effect on people." The officer chuckled softly. "I believe this neighborhood will be stronger now. And if Karen tries to stir trouble again, I will be ready to remind people what fairness means." With that, he left, but his presence left a lasting mark on Omar and Amina's hearts. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. Several neighbors came to their door, carrying small baskets, plates of food, and even flowers. Mrs. Latif was the first to speak. "We wanted to thank you. You gave voice to what we all felt but were too afraid to say. You helped us stand together." Another neighbor added, "We let fear silence us. But yesterday, we learned we don't have to be afraid anymore." Amina welcomed them inside, offering tea and kind words. The house that once felt like the target of hostility now filled with laughter, conversation, and gentle warmth. Omar sat listening, his heart swelling. For the first time since moving here, he felt they truly belonged. One of the younger neighbors, a woman named Nadia, leaned forward and said, "I want to start something new. A neighborhood gathering each month, where we share food, talk about our needs, and decide together. No more letters slipped under doors. No more threats. Just people helping people." Everyone agreed eagerly. Omar felt joy rising in his chest. This was what community was supposed to be, not fear, but connection. Days turned into weeks, and the changes became clear. The board, humbled by the meeting, reviewed its rules and softened them where needed. Notices became reminders, not threats. Instead of suspicion, there was cooperation. And slowly, the scars of Karen's strict reign began to heal. As for Karen, she kept to herself. The once loud voice of authority was now a closed door at the end of the street. Some felt pity for her, others anger, but Amina only felt a quiet sadness. Power had been her comfort, and now without it, she was left alone. One evening, as Amina watered her plants in the garden, She saw Karen passing by. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Karen looked away quickly, but Amina only smiled softly. It was not forgiveness spoken aloud, but it was enough. Later that night, Omar and Amina sat together under the stars. The sky was clear, and the neighborhood was silent except for the gentle chirping of crickets. Omar placed his hand over hers. "You changed everything," he said. Amina shook her head. "We changed everything. You stood with me. And so did the neighbors. Together, we built something new." Omar looked up at the sky, his heart full. "This place is finally home." Amina leaned her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes with peace. The battle had been long and heavy, but the ending was gentle, filled with hope. The neighborhood was no longer a place of fear and tension. It was now a place where children could play freely, where neighbors could talk without whispering, and where people stood together instead of apart. It was not perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, real was better than perfect. Amina whispered into the night, "Fairness is the root of peace." Omar squeezed her hand, and together, they sat in silence, knowing that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one built not on rules and fines, but on trust, kindness, and the quiet strength of unity.